Okay, welcome to Growth Without Referrals, the podcast where leaders talk honestly about what's actually working to win new clients today beyond referrals alone. And I'm your host, Mark Ferguson, and I'm joined by Harris Kalafanis. He's the managing director of Good Voice Group. He's a strategist, designer, educator whose career has taken him from Greece to the US, from 7 Olympic Games to global education initiatives. Harris brings a unique lens on growth, how trust is built, how ecosystems shape decisions, and why design often becomes the first true business development tool. And Harris, welcome to the show.
Mark, thank you for having me.
Excellent. And today, Harris, I believe you're actually joining us from Greece. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm in the island of Mykonos, which, it's one of the 7 modern wonders of tourism, and everybody in the world wants to come along with other places like Ibiza and St. Barth. But it's February, everything is closed, it's raining, and it's the opposite of what the summer vibe has for people here.
Man. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining. Harris, before we jump into growth, take us back a bit. How did your path take you from Greece to the US through the Olympics and ultimately to founding the Good Voice Group?
I was very fortunate to grow up in an era of great prosperity. The Olympic Games were coming in Athens. I was a kid. I went to college in Greece, and then I found my way working for the United States Olympic Committee, serving them in Athens. Of course, that was a monumental opportunity that gave me the wings to be able to fly across the pond, being able to study and do graduate work at a U.S. university and work for the Olympic Committee, specifically through one of their national governing bodies that had one of the biggest sports at the time. So being able to be at the right place, the right time, but also my own personal branding aesthetics, right? I wasn't always sure what I wanted to do, but I always knew who I wanted to be like, and I wanted to try to be close to them. So being close to, Olympic athletes, Olympic executives, and all that Olympic ecosystem was kind of the initial compass. And that compass, after the Athens Olympics in 2004, led me to a life in the Rockies and in Colorado. And then that kind of led into other Olympics. And for the first time, I was indoctrinated into what it is to be able to host people to the Olympic Games, what it is to be able to create sponsorship decks and pitching decks, and how to talk to investors and how to attract people to the Olympics in order to be able to support Olympic athletes through hospitality packages primarily. That was my first true exposure to branding and design that builds trust through a unified symbol, the Olympic logo that was well recognized around the world. Moving from that, I had a few years later the unique experience and privilege to serve for the design team of the U.S. Olympic Museum. And that was the first time where I did something outside of the traditional Olympic Games and the sporting saga. It had to do more with business. I got involved with Panasonic. I got involved with some pristine architectural offices out of New York. And it was the first time I kind of saw business in its pure form, in America, where, big is not big enough at times. But it was there where all the dots of my past experience start to connect. Being able to serve the U.S. Olympic Museum and that initial design team, that eventually led into a lot of lessons, a lot of business lessons, and that led to developing Good Voice Group just because people started asking, hey, we have this problem, we have this design issue, we need to do this, we need to do that. What do you think? And as I would share my opinion, before you know it, I would be signing a client. Good Voice was actually founded in a very organic fashion. I didn't even know I needed a company at the time, but because I had clients that were asking for certain solutions or certain advice that had to do with international business or solving complex government related problems, that's how it all came together. So once the first clients, which to be honest, the first clients were Panasonic, the Olympic Museum, and some vendors around that came together, I very quickly had to create an LLC and design a website. And that's when I, for the first time, had the power to essentially apply some of my branding and aesthetics. And then educational clients came on, business clients came on, and Today, I'm serving Hudson Global Scholar, an online education provider that serves 30 countries and 700 partners around the world. That's why I'm in Mykonos. I'm visiting one of our school partners here. And all along, I have been guided by the principles that I got back in the day working with the U.S. Olympic Committee, that it was always about how do we exude brand trust? How do we aspire people, whether it's to donate, support, or sponsor Olympic athletes? And I think in business, it comes the same way, right? If you can aspire and inspire people to follow you, then the rest kind of comes together, right? Kind of going around to your, how do we do business in this new digital era? How do we pick up references? I think it's up to us, right? We have the devices and the tools. I was in the plane earlier today and I was talking with another colleague. 5 years ago, I couldn't do a poster. I couldn't do a social media post. I couldn't design a website. I couldn't even fathom to write code and create my own software product as I can do now with the help of AI, right? So technology over the past, let's say 5-6 years has democratized everyone, kind of like Prometheus back in the day getting fire from the gods. I feel we are all the modern Prometheans where we just need to grab the fire that is around and then your leads, your references are going to come following.
That's a great intro. Thank you, Harris. And last time we talked, you said your last name translates to Good Voice, which is actually your company name, right?
Yeah. So a lot of people, when I first came to America, let's be honest, I was an immigrant and I got the appropriate treatment. It didn't bother me, right? I was going to the shining city at the top of the hill and all the problems around didn't matter. So a lot of people would say, well, colophonous, what does that mean? And I would say, well, that means good voice. And so, in the beginning, it meant nothing. But then over the years, I just realized everything we're doing at the end of the day is how do we help companies? How do we help our own selves amplify the good voice? And again, kind of the heritage I have from the Olympic movement, all these Olympic athletes try to serve their countries by being the ambassadors to the global stage. And in many ways, I feel that branding kind of has that same effect, right? You have that unique moment and opportunity through design to be the ambassador of whatever idea you want to share with the rest of the world. So good voice kind of has that deeper meaning of, good on one end and trying to share the voice on the other, whatever that voice is.
Okay. And you said something in our pre-call that stuck with me. You said people will pay a premium for something that's aesthetically feels wow, and that good design will build trust before someone even fully understands the product. When you say design builds trust, what does that mean practically?
Well, anything that is well designed has somebody had a lot of thought behind it, right? People feel that. They feel that from a sense of energy. They feel that through their eyes, the way they will touch it, the way they will use it, right? It's a useful thing. And immediately it exudes trust. It's something that almost everybody feels that someone else has put time, thought, and energy into it. And no different than a cup of coffee that we can make at home for, for 30 cents. The same way, right? Starbucks has packaged an entire ecosystem for you to pay for the same amount of coffee for 30 cents for $6 or $7. Why you do that? Because you feel inspired to walk in there. You are always greeted with a smile. And anything you pick and choose is aesthetically pleasing. As if when we walk into a location like that, it's like a vacation for the mind in that moment. So people will pay a premium. They won't really pay a premium. They will express their gratitude to be around products and services that someone else has put some serious thinking into it.
Okay. And most firms think growth equals more outreach, right? And you argue growth often starts with the ecosystem around the brand. Can you help us unpack that?
When you're setting the foundations, right, of what you want to do, you need to, no different than dressing up. You need to take a shower. You need to take care of yourself. You need to wear the appropriate clothing. You need to be able to show to yourself for your own self-esteem, but to others as well, who you are and what you stand for. And then the same thing has to go to anything you're touching, whether you're creating a poster, whether it's a website, whether it's a podcast in this case, right? You've put a lot of thought and energy into that. That exudes trust. So the initial foundation of your sales needs to be well designed to exude trust. And then, of course, outreach will come. But if you don't have the foundations in place, you won't be able to do outreach at scale, or you're going to do it kind of like a flare or sporadically, or it would be a moment in time. Because at the end of the day, good products and services sell themselves, right? You just need to put it out there, create that critical mass. But going back to the basics, if it's not well designed, thought, planned to be scaled, then it doesn't matter, right? If you have a bad product and you go left and right and nobody buys it, it's kind of a chicken and an egg. But here, the chicken is very clear. It's the design of the product or the service that has to come first.
Okay. And Harris, I want to get your perspective on international growth, right? You've worked across the US, Europe, and global education markets. How is winning business different internationally versus here in the States?
Especially for Americans that go internationally, they have to be extra cautious, right? They have to not only do well their homework, they have to also be able to feel what is happening on the ground locally. They have to have a deep sense of historical meaning, of understanding, because in most cases, people around the world don't just have a couple hundred years institution and government structure and history the way we do, right? In most cases, people, nations, businesses may be going 6, 7, 1,000 years back. They might have history. And that history, they don't demand respect, but they have endured time. They have endured, good moments and very hard moments. They've gone through wars, they've gone through total destructions, and they've somehow survived in an environment that is not friendly, in an environment that is keeping them captives of their own either geography or own limitations. So when we go and try to offer solutions of any kind, whether it's a product or service, we have to be able to exhibit that respect. We have to be able to exhibit that respect subconsciously in most cases. We have to be able to express it. And we have to be able to also listen what it is, because in America, we can, we've sent a man to the moon. We can do anything we want if we understand what it is. But in most cases, because we are technologically ahead of several countries and nations, when we go to places, we think that just because they don't have iPhones or because maybe they don't have whatever we have, that they might not be thinking like us. And I have seen time and time again where our lack of understanding or our over optimistic approach to life might be perceived as arrogance. And I'll be the first person to tell you that I've done that mistake myself. When I start doing business, especially going back to Greece, because I felt I'd seen so much, because I felt I was so ahead of the game, my eagerness to share and try to implement things I had seen in America was perceived as arrogance. And to some extent it was, because I totally disregarded the history and the limitations of their present state. And I had the arrogance of the young American that is coming to tell them better. So I've gone through some deep, deep valleys, and I've received some hard lessons. And it's not that I had any bad intentions, right? I was actually eager to share what I had seen. I was very fortunate to see the digitization of business. I was very fortunate to be on the front lines of the social media wave and even the AI wave back in the day. And when you travel internationally, just because it's 2025, it's not 2025 in most countries outside of the United States. Everybody is in a different time and era that they're living in. They might be living better lives, right? For example, here in Mykonos, when you fly with the airplane, you see villas. Everybody has a swimming pool. All the houses are white, and everybody from around the world wants to come here. But their average salary is $1,000 a month. Very different from what we are accustomed to be living, right? So having that respect and that understanding, and I don't think that's just, doing business internationally. I think that's also doing business in the U.S. I've worked in places in the U.S. where I kind of did the same mistakes. I thought I knew better because I had seen something different, and that wasn't the case.
Harris, a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree with you. And let's shift back to the core theme of the show, growth without referrals. When you look back at Good Voice Group, how did your first non-referral client find you?
I created an article about how Olympic values can be capitalized internationally. And someone saw that and asked somebody that knew me. It wasn't a referral, let's be honest, right? But again, I started at some point writing a lot. And before the AI days, that was easier. Not now these days with AI, I'll be honest, it's a little bit easier to write a lot. But back in the day, to have a thought and to be able to synthesize it into an article that has a beginning, middle, and end, and some true value for any reader around the world wasn't a walk in the park. So I guess as I created my own ecosystem, whether it was a website, whether it was the way I present the portfolio, whether it's the way I kind of share my ideas, I think that's where non-referrals start showing up, right? And I urge a lot of, business people these days, everybody has had a story one way or another, and everybody is exposed to different inputs and realities and perspectives every day. But not a lot of people can think to share that back, whatever that is. And I think we're all interested to know about what's going on in the world from each other. And these days, there's really no excuse. It's very easy to set up your own podcast. It's very easy to set up your own studio. It's very easy to write an article and have some good peer review and then post it, and a lot of people would see it. Think about this. This 8 years ago was an impossible situation. Me sitting in this beautiful island in the other side of the world, and you being in the middle of America and having a conversation as if we are next to each other. And we don't need to have $1 million studio production in between us. So things are within our grasp, and technology has democratized and scaled our abilities to be able to reach more people.
Mhm.
And we just need to embrace that.
Absolutely. And, there's several channels that a person can use. There's portfolios and case studies and writing that you just mentioned, thought leadership, speaking, teaching, partnerships, your website. Which of these actually move the needle the most for you?
I have two responses here. The one is when I teach at Denver University or when I am in front of a body of students and I'm sharing something, that's where I feel like I'm actually contributing back to the world. I'm kind of returning some of the blessings I've received by sharing things, especially with the younger generation or whoever is interested to hear more. The other thing that I think really helps me a lot is forcing myself to create an article. When I have an idea and I come up with the thinking about it, right, I create an initial draft. I don't even write it. I say it in my phone. Then I go to the drawing board and I try to synthesize it with correlating data. I try to synthesize it with, okay, what's the final message and outcome here? And if somebody reads this, will they learn something? Will it help them understand how the world actually works? Will it be able to move the needle for them? It's not an easy task, and I'm trying to do it almost on a weekly basis the past 5, 6 years. I don't always succeed, but it's the one thing that has helped me refine my skills. Not that everybody's going to read the articles, right? I've had sometimes people, the few thousand people read an article, sometimes it'll be, less than a few hundred. And it's not that the article or the articles drive maybe the business outcome you would think, but because I take a deep dive in certain matters, it actually helps me articulate very specific complex ideas that otherwise I wouldn't. I'll give you a very specific example. I met today with a mother here in the island of Mykonos in Greece, where her girl wants to go and study in the US, right? And she needs to stack certain courses, AP courses and other high school courses. And I made the argument from an article I wrote 3 years ago about, hey, look, your kid that is in Mykonos should go study around the world, travel, do business, and then come back and reinvest her knowledge and her treasures back to her island, because her island needs so many things like a new hospital and doctors and how to attract more funding for research programs. And I had written an article about that 3 years ago. And because I had written the article, I was able to offer to this mother solid local data and arguments that resonated with her. And that really helped what we were doing here. The mother left elated, And she said, "Oh my God, this is something amazing. I'm going to talk to more people to join your program, blah, blah, blah." And that only happened because I wrote an article about healthcare in random islands around Greece that have certain limitations due to lack of funding and government attention. And 3 years later, because I had done that exercise, I was able to speak to a local as a local. Although I have nothing to do with this place, I visit it maybe once or twice a year. So I don't know if that answers maybe the question, kind of an out of box thinking, but I don't do it by design per se. I just know that I want to be knowledgeable about certain things. And then a few months or years later, they actually present very valuable.
Great story. And like you said, I love to hear stories, Harris. That was a good one. I want to ask you about what hasn't worked. What have you tried that you thought would bring business but didn't?
About 10 years ago, I worked for a development company in Colorado. And at the time, I thought that if I could take all the flair and all the glory of the Olympics into real estate, that somehow that would generate value. Somehow that would resonate with people. I got some high profile businesses, but I hadn't done my homework in real estate, right? Real estate is a very different business, right? In the Olympics,
Mhm.
you set up the stage and everybody's ready for a show. In real estate, you try to, mix use, building, hotel, anything. That's a 4 or 5 year project at best, right? You need to really focus on entitlements. You need to have the right design team. You need to be able to do a very strong, cost analysis. You need to have the right builders, so on, so on. Very, very, very different nature. I went into that business with the arrogance of my past successes and not with the wisdom that I probably have today into being a little more cautious. It was one of the biggest, I would say, tragedies of my professional life, and at the same time, one of my biggest blessings, because it was a lesson, and it was a lesson that actually propelled me to international business, because I never expect to go into something like that after 7 Olympic Games and fail.
Hmm.
I had the arrogance of 7 Olympic wins, not as an athlete, but as an executive. That was a very valuable lesson that the universe gave me, and the people also around there. I thought I knew better, and that was not the case. I don't know why I'm sharing that story now. I've never really brought that up ever since. Nobody has asked me that question before, maybe. But going into a new business, no different than your previous question about international business. The successes of yesterday was yesterday. The success of tomorrow will, like anything else, you have to take it from the beginning.
And Harris, thank you for sharing that. And I think, when we think about lessons learned, many times those lessons learned, it's how we personally react to those, right? Things happen. One might say, wow, that was a setback. But as a person, how you react to it and how you move forward, I think is so key, because those learnings will help you as you move forward. And if you had to rebuild your pipeline from scratch tomorrow with no referrals, what would you do in the first 30 days?
I would literally go somewhere that I can see the horizon, whether it's at the top of a mountain or a beach for a couple of days. And then once that energy has gone around a couple of times, I would try to build a brand new ecosystem based on something that I love. Whatever that would be, right? Not too long ago, literally, I think a couple of months, I was in our mountain house in Greece, and I'm seeing all these random plots of land where I'm like, it would be so nice if you can put a cabin here or a cabin there, kind of what we have in Colorado, all these cabins.
Hmm.
And I'm like, and make them, sustainable, where they don't need to be connected to the grid. And I started thinking, oh, that's a kind of cool business. I wrote it down and I created actually an app out of it, right? An app where somebody can plug in the size of their plot, the elevation, the humidity, and about 100 other different data points that you would know about a certain location. And then the app, through AI, of course, would kind of give you an archetype from 30 different lodges, right, or cabins. And not that I had a setback the past couple months, but I was in a place where I was looking at the horizon. And I did something I've never done before, right? I created essentially a micro real estate app for individuals to be able to easily calculate how they can create remote self-sustainable cabins. I have the app sitting around, right? I haven't pushed it or I haven't gone to market with it. And that's not my immediate intention, but I kind of thought of something completely different and created a whole different ecosystem. It wasn't, oh, let me go do another Olympic gig, or let me, try to build another school, or let me go do another real estate. It was essentially a pure software product idea that I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool thing to have. I've tested it and it works. But again, going back to your question, right? I'm thinking if you can absorb the energy of the vastness of a horizon, you don't know what's going to come out of it. But if you fall,
That's fascinating. Yes. And what a unique app you built there. I just love it. Here's a question. What one simple weekly habit compounds trust over time, builds trust? Mm, mm. I love it. Great perspective. Harris, this has been fantastic. It's thoughtful, practical, and very real. And if people want to learn more about your work or read your writing, where should they go? Hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again, Harris. And I want to thank audience for joining us on Growth Without Referrals. Thank you.